Previously on Building a Cottage.
Right, as far as tiling is concerned, we've made our sheet of tiles.
Yes.
We cut those into strips. So
Yes.
you need to have a run of PVA just over that
On
edge.
the edge. Right.
Because this section of roof will lay over that, plus the guttering on there.
Right. Hello and welcome again to the studio from myself and Roy Hickman, and we're continuing with the building of Ashdown Cottage. Where we got to yesterday, we just started making the tiles by putting the thin strips onto the backing paper. We've actually finished those now on their individual sheets, but we'll come back to that in a minute because, just to be awkward, I've asked Roy if we could actually put an extension onto Ashdown Cottage, and to make it even more complicated for him, I've asked if we can finish it in a different covering, and we're going to go for a sort of a rendering on that, Roy, aren't we? So what problems am I posing for you by setting the new target?
Well, no real problem. It's just that if it depends upon the type of covering, if you use your outer casing as your reveal on the wall, then you can then use your card as the background, or your window frames and door frames, whereas before on this building...
So on this one, inside, although we can't actually see it, you've got a frame inside a hole in the window inside the frame.
We put the windows onto
a
Christmas
built
card,
frame, yes.
That's right.
But this time...
Now, I've cut the windows out, but instead of putting those onto
little bits
the
of card
and using the card as a window frame, I'm matching that onto there.
Right.
I've actually cut these apertures to the correct size of the windows.
Right.
And before I can glue those in, I now need to have a replica piece, because I'm going to be able to, or need, if I'm going to put a covering on, in this case I'm going to use a fire cement to form a random stone walling.
Yes.
And that is applied to the outer covering.
Right.
But there's no way I can do that if it's holes and everything else. So I'm going to produce a separate piece of material for that, separate bit of card. So before we put the windows in, a thin piece of card, as long as it's fairly substantial and will take the fire cement, which is applied fairly damp. So the building itself will fold round exactly the same as our main one.
It's 4 walls, we don't just do 3.
No, just 4 walls.
So it's a solid structure in its own right.
Solid again, and this will have its own flooring. Treat it as a separate building.
Right.
And only when that's stable will we then apply it to there. And what will happen is that we're going to put it into the recess here. So that will fit in like that.
Like that, gotcha.
So there'll be some cutting.
Yes.
Where we've done work that we're going to forget. That doesn't make any odds. The main thing is...
Just as you would if you put an extension on a real building.
Exactly right. Yes. So I've got a bit of odd card. I'm going to then use the...
Use that one?
That's the one, yeah. Let's move that one out of the way. Place it on corner, so I'm just going to form the apex section. I'm just marking the corners.
So draw around the windows.
Just marking the bottom of the card, so I now have got tops and bottoms, and I can cut that piece if I have my cutting mat over. Thank you.
Remember from yesterday, Roy uses 2 knives, and to remind him which one's the sharp one and which one's the scoring knife, the sharp one has got the elastic band around the handle. Now, in this case, you're not doing a complete second shell, are you? You're doing it as 4 separate walls.
I'm just doing separate individual pieces,
walls, 3 separate walls for the rendering,
The points I marked up, from the card.
Yes.
And again, you don't have to be too particular on this one, because you'll have to finish off when we come to do the actual rendering.
Right.
Onto this card. When we apply this card to
the
actual building, there'll be odd places where it won't match.
Right.
And it's got to be filled in, likewise when we do the corners, where the 2 sides meet together.
Right. So there's a little bit of trimming's inevitable.
That's right. In order Just need to cut the apertures out here. Well, there's no point in going further on that one because
we're going to adopt the here's one we made earlier principle with this.
Got one already done. There's our card.
And there it is.
So the next stage will be to get our fast cement and prepare that for rendering.
Right.
Right.
And you've got all four. So we've now got, sorry, three. It's just three shapes, isn't it, to go around the...
Just three shapes, yes.
Because we don't need the back wall finished.
No.
1, 2, and 3.
If I show that how that's going to go in.
Right.
There's our building.
Yes.
One of which will be the back.
Yep.
That's that side. So we'll have the flat side.
Right.
Which will be extended on from there. The apex onto that one, and the one with the door you're putting down.
Right, so now we're moving on to the cladding section, and they've got one or two more bits and bobs you're using now, Roy, which we didn't mention in the programme on tools. So what are the new items to explain to the viewers, first of all, that you're going to be using? Obviously, the covering, which I think is in there. Should we start with that?
Yes, the covering is Pyroma fire cement.
Right.
And rather than carry 2 or 3 kilogram of fire cement around, I tend to keep in small containers because I don't use a lot of it, but it does tend to dry out, and therefore you'll see that I use multiple layers of plastic
God, you
bags.
really do mean multiple layers,
I do
don't you?
mean, and I keep a minimum of 4.
Right.
And that way, I know full well that that's going to be as pliable the next time I come to use it, if there's, of course, any.
And that's sort of a putty-like substance by the look
yes,
at it.
Yes, yeah. The main thing to remember with this is it has got no adhesive qualities whatsoever.
Right.
So therefore, if I want it to stick anywhere, I've got to apply glue.
Yes.
And then apply that onto the glue.
Right.
Onto the glued surface. And in this case, I'm going to use PVA.
PVA.
So using my very elaborate container again.
Yeah. With any water in that, or not? Just
no, it's
just
neat as it is,
right.
Completely neat.
No washing up liquid, nothing at all. Right.
No, this is just neat
PVA.
PVA.
Right.
Right. The first thing then is to apply the covering of.
Now we're doing this on our work surface because Roy's assured me this washes off, so it's no problem. I leave it up to you whether you use your kitchen work surface with or without a covering on it.
If you've got a plastic sheet, you can use a plastic sheet, but I'll use this.
Yeah. This is a workshop after all.
But that's right. And the other thing I ought to mention, and that is when I cut these out, I marked them with an F for face side. Because if that was reversed, and I put
and it had been plain card, you could get it wrong.
And one can see straight away from the extension part that it would be totally off. That's where the windows were.
So the other way around.
And now it's going to be the opposite way about.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's awkward for me to hold.
Yes.
So just a dab of PVA, press it onto another piece
underneath.
Show through underneath.
So you've got a working tab.
That's right. It won't take a minute just to secure that on there. But it's easier to tear off. You need to use a card that will actually
with that
laminate very readily, so that when you tear this away,
it's not a problem. Yeah. Okay. And that's all, not a particularly thick layer of PVA, just enough to keep it.
As long as it's nice and wet. Next stage, using the palette knife, painter's palette knife, and I've also got an ordinary knife, which could be a butter knife, but a butter knife tends to be a bit flimsy. So ordinary table knife, providing you've got permission, of course. I'm going to make certain this is just wetted.
And all you're doing is just smearing over a thin layer.
Yeah, I want a layer on there, approximately 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch, no more, because it's quite heavy material.
Yes.
And as long as you've got the sufficient depth, that
you've got to have some depth because you're going to start using a shape.
You're going to use a press, and therefore, if you've got no depth, you won't be able to press into it anyway. So.
Right. You're not worried about the windows at this stage?
No, no. Just make certain I get a covering. It's a bit of a messy job, but...
Somebody's got to do it. And it's constant, just that little bit of water is essential just to make it flow more smoothly.
Yeah, if you don't keep it this moist, what will happen is it'll pick it up.
It'll pull it away all the time.
And then you won't end up by getting an even layer.
Right.
It gets all rough. You can add a bit more. I can see it's a little bit thin.
Thin there.
Right. At
And
this point, I can lift it.
Yes. And you're not too fussed about it being right over the edges. You're not trying to trim it off at this stage.
No. I will now use my palette knife for that.
And presumably that will get reapplied to the pile and save for another day.
Well, that will be used on the next piece we do. As far as the window apertures, you can see where they are.
Yeah.
Just work your palette knife round.
Right.
So that you're keeping that clear. You're going to do this again after you've pressed it, because again, when using the press, it will actually move the material, across the apertures.
And how long will this take to dry?
Depending upon the atmosphere, I think within a workshop like this, which is fairly warm, probably a couple of hours.
Right.
But
leave it longer rather than shorter.
The full drying process will probably be 24 hours.
Right. So at least leave it overnight.
So I'm just going to put that aside. What would happen now? I'd continue and do the same thing for all the parts of the building that I'm going to do. So there's a further 2 to do.
Right.
But we've already got to the stage where we have prepared those.
Yes.
And I can bring those which I've already done. When that's dried, and in this case, I'm not going to have enough sufficient time to.
No.
You can bypass it.
Yeah.
But there's a means of ensuring that is ready to be covered with your press, and that is by using paper.
Yes.
As a means of retaining a talcum powder, which you're going to use. You need to use a talcum powder anyway, because you need to make certain that on the press, and this is a press which I made using a casting resin, which we'll do a separate
program on, yes.
And it's on random stone walling. By applying the talcum powder to the work, you're absorbing the moisture, and it keeps it as a separator. The last thing I want to do is to
pull it all off and rip it.
Off.
Now, does the talcum powder? Right. Okay. You just answered the question.
You make certain that your wife or other partner knows that you're using talcum powder, because there's nothing worse than going home smelling and wondering where you
I mean, this is going to sound a daft question. Does it matter what talcum powder you use?
No.
Is it baby powder, any powder you like?
Any talcum powder.
But preferably not scented.
Preferably not scented. But the cheaper the better.
Yeah, sure.
I use a tea strainer as a means of... It's a lot easier to get it covered. And I'm using quite a lot because I've used that quite wet.
Yes.
I need a solid surface, so I'm making something I've got no folds on the paper which are in the way, and then the press.
Now is that something that can go at 90 degrees? Is there a right way and a wrong way to this?
There's the right way and wrong way. This is where the actual lay is, and I've marked the top of my press
to make them horizontal lines.
One advantage, if I using newspaper, if I'd got it here, would be to line this up with the columns and the print.
So
and then you can line these with the columns of the paper, because once I put it over there, I can't see.
You can't see it.
But I'm quite happy that it's going to go all right. And that's it.
And that's it.
Clean off your edges, because you can see now how...
That's squeezed it out past the edges again, yeah. And can that be reused, or is that with the talcum powder in it? Is that going to be thrown away?
I wouldn't tend to use this unless...
But it's a small amount, so it's not terribly wasteful.
Yeah, that's right.
Is fire cement, is that expensive stuff?
No. You should be able to get a kilogram pot anywhere between £1, £1.50, £2, some of that.
Peanuts, really.
I have a pot here. I can show you.
We'll have a look later. Have a look at that later.
Yeah, fine.
Right. So that's really the end where we get to now.
Right.
And in the next programme, when we come back, we'll have the ones dried, ready to actually apply to the extension.
Good. Yeah, fine.
Thank you, Roy.